I'm a Napa County Supervisor, and I have the honor of being Vice Chair for the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And we are also joined by my colleague, Supervisor Belia Ramos, who's also the ABAG Vice President. And let me just say, Napa County is very well represented in regional government here. And on behalf of both of us, I'd like to welcome all the public that's with us today to the digital workshop on Plan Bay Area 2050. For those that are here again, welcome to this digital workshop. We are very interested in hearing from you. This is a workshop focused specifically on Napa County. And while COVID-19 and public health still remains our #1 priority, we did want to do these workshops digitally to continue to engage with the public on things that are so critical to the Bay Area. So this is one of 9 workshops that's focused specifically on counties to gain further insights and inputs from the public on the plan. So we're going to be holding these workshops throughout the Bay Area in formats like this, but also telephone. Today, as I shared, the goal is to hear from you, the public. So again, thank you for taking time out of your busy days to participate and be part of representative government. We are seeking input on Plan Bay Area 2050, the draft blueprint, which is a 30-year regional vision that seeks to create more affordable, connected, diverse, and a healthy and vibrant Bay Area for all residents that are part of it. The draft blueprint, I want to remind everyone, is a first draft, and it's intended to be that because we really want to garner feedback from you as we're doing these outreach events in local communities. This is integrating 25 resilient and equitable strategies aimed to make the Bay Area a better place in the area, specifically around transportation, housing, environment, and the economy. The blueprint is a critical step in the Plan Bay Area 2050 process. We have been engaging with the public for over 2 years to gain input on these core strategies. And I know as your commissioner on MTC, this has come before the commission, and we've had some really thorough discussion around these strategies and the appropriateness of it on our quality of life. So again, I thank you on behalf of the Napa County Board of Supervisors, the Vice Chair of MTC, for being part of this process. We look forward to hearing your insights and your input. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Supervisor Belia Ramos.
Thank you, Supervisor Pedroza. Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to join you this evening as we present important information about the Bay Area region. It's important to you, it's important to us, and we welcome your input this evening. We want to hear from you as to how you will help us refine the draft blueprint, which is slated for approval this fall and will be integrated into Plan Bay Area 2050 prior to its adoption in mid-2021. At this moment, in addition to acknowledging the challenges we're experiencing because of this pandemic, as a Latina leader, we also want to state our support of the Black community and all communities who are affected by violence and injustice that has claimed too many lives here in the Bay Area and around the country. As regional agencies that focus on transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy of the Bay Area, it's our role to increase access to opportunity that's really rooted in equity. We stand side by side with those working toward a fair and just society. Again, on behalf of MTC and ABAG, I want to thank you for spending just a couple hours of your time with us to provide your input on what will help shape the Bay Area for the next 30 years. With that, I will turn it over to MTC Executive Director, Therese McMillan, for a few opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. And again, I am so thrilled to be here with all of you. And thank you, Supervisor Ramos and Supervisor Pedroza, 2 of the leaders I am thrilled to have the opportunity to work with on a daily basis. I'd like to mention as we start this effort on Plan Bay Area 2050, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and ABAG's equity platform, which highlights our 2 agencies' commitment to equity within not only our agency portfolios, but specifically our projects and work programs that affect the Bay Area. For more information on the equity platform, the URL is listed. And we certainly would urge you to connect in and take advantage of that. The Plan Bay Area 2050 Draft Blueprint is a culmination of 2+ years of work, talking with the public about their vision for the Bay Area and the strategies that will help make that vision a reality. The information we will present today is a culmination of that input. So without further ado, I would like to introduce MTC and ABAG staff member Ursula Vogler, who will walk you through the next steps in the workshop.
Thank you so much, Therese and Supervisors Ramos and Pedrosa. I'm Ursula Vogler, and I work in public engagement at MTC and ABAG, and I will serve as your host for this evening's workshop. I'm so happy to be joining you this evening to help get your input on the draft blueprint. I'd like to provide an overview of today's workshop. First, MTC ABAG planning staff members Dave Vaughton and Michael Germerod will introduce Plan Bay Area 2050 and its draft blueprint. This will include an introductory video that will help us provide the detail about the blueprint. Next, they will share findings from the strategies analyzed as part of the draft blueprint and review local impacts. We will pause for clarifying questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You may type your questions and comments there at any time during the presentation. Then planning staff will walk you through our interactive poll activity. This is where we will use the Poll EV program, and we'll explain how to use the program in the next slide. The planning staff will then highlight important regional programs before moving into the question and answer period. Finally, we will wrap up by providing information about how you can access additional resources and provide additional input. We'd like to go over a handful of logistics for this evening's workshop. In order to enable participants to provide input in an efficient manner, everyone will be muted during the workshop. We encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please type your questions and comments at any time during the workshop. Staff will answer questions directly in the Q&A feature or during key points of the workshop verbally. We will also be using the polling platform Poll EV. To participate in the poll activity, you will use your smartphone or computer. For an internet-enabled device, please use a web browser and go to pollev.com/MTCABAG302. When we begin the poll, the questions will populate automatically on your phone or computer. If you're joining us by phone only, you can still participate using the text option on your cell phone. Please text MTC ABAG 302 to the number 22333 to participate. Also, those of you joining us by phone only will not be able to enter questions and comments through the webinar platform, but there is an opportunity to submit your comments verbally via the phone. After the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we will enter into the official record. You can also participate in the poll by texting your responses to each question. There are 2 additional ways that you can provide comments. If you have detailed written comments, please send them to info@planbayarea.org, and I'll be repeating that a few times. To provide a verbal comment, you can call our comment line, which I just mentioned, 415-778-2292. We will post this information once again at the end of the workshop. Finally, in order to ensure the safety of everyone here today, we ask that you please refrain from using profanity or making culturally insensitive comments. These will not be tolerated at any time. We look forward to a productive workshop. So now let's dive in. So we're going to start off with an icebreaker question so that we can all get comfortable with the polling software we are using. So right now, please go to this Poll EV URL in your web browser, pollev.com/MTCABAG302, or text MTCABAG302 to the number 22333. The question should be on your browser, web browser. We would like to know, here's the question, Pre-COVID-19, how did you typically get to work? If you're joining us by text, you can send your response by typing the letter associated with your answer choice, which I will read now. For bus, select A. For subway or train, select B. For personal car, select C. For carpool, select D. For taxi or TNC like Uber or Lyft, select E. For bicycle, select F. For walk, select G. For ferry, select H. And for other or not applicable, select I. Okay, we're going to give you a minute to respond, which I think, oh, it's still coming. Okay, so it looks like most of you drove, but then people took the bus and people rode their bike, which is really great. Okay, well, I'm now going to turn it over to our planning staff, Dave and Michael, who will guide us through the content of today's workshop.
Thank you, Ursula. We're excited to be here to talk with you and the public about the Plan Bay Area 2050 Draft Blueprint. We've worked to create a more comprehensive 30-year regional vision for the region's future, integrating transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. Today's presentation will first highlight the strategies that are at the core of the draft blueprint. Second, touch on some of the key regional and county outcomes. And third, seek your input on how to tackle challenges that remain prior to the final blueprint phase. As Commissioner Pedrosa noted in his opening remarks, the draft blueprint is all about working towards the regional vision of a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area, not just for some residents, but for all Bay Area residents. Building on top of more than 2 years of work to develop the most resilient and equitable strategies to tackle our region's big challenges, the draft blueprint includes 25 bold strategies to make the region better for the next generation. It's very important to note that the strategies we're talking about today are not near-term actions, nor are they legislative proposals. They are ideas for cities and towns, the region and the state to consider over the long term as we address challenges across the Bay Area and beyond. To learn more, we will soon turn to a video describing the draft blueprint and its strategies. And please feel free to enter your comments and questions in the Q&A box at any time during the presentation. We'll answer them at set points during the workshop. Next slide. Before we show the video, we'd be remiss not to acknowledge how profoundly the coronavirus pandemic and the 2020 recession are affecting our lives right now. While we didn't predict the pandemic, we have been planning for an uncertain future in recent years. All of the strategies you'll see today in the draft blueprint have been stress tested against many of the unanticipated forces we are experiencing right now, and they held up to those stress tests. And those sorts of forces are things like higher levels of telecommuting, boom-bust economic cycles, and greater adoption of e-commerce. While summer 2020 is a great time to ensure our strategies are best aligned for the post-COVID future, it's important to note that some of the strategies that are included are super timely for the moment we're in today. These include quick build bicycle improvements for a world where public transit has much lower capacity, renter protections for families at risk of eviction, childcare subsidies and other services for our essential workers, and of course, expanded open space investments at a time where all too many of us are seeking some respite from being sheltered in place at home. Now let's learn about the full suite of draft blueprint strategies through a brief video. Again, feel free to enter any questions into the Q&A box, and let's go to the next slide.
Hi, thank you for joining us. As we navigate these unprecedented times, we thank you for taking a moment to think about the future. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments are creating a plan to make the Bay Area more resilient in the face of unexpected challenges like the one we are experiencing now. How we react to these challenges is key to making the Bay Area more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. Over the next few minutes, we will outline our ideas for the future in a plan we call Plan Bay Area 2050, the regional vision for transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment for the next 3 decades. The heart of the plan, what we are calling the blueprint, is what we'll be focusing on today. Over the last 2 years, we asked people like you for ideas on solutions to meet the Bay Area's transportation and housing challenges and ensure the region's economic resilience and extraordinary natural beauty. We analyzed the most promising recommendations to come up with 25 proposed strategies, which together make up the draft blueprint. We're excited to share these strategies and hear how we can fine-tune them in the months ahead. We're looking to improve our transportation system by considering how we can maintain and optimize existing infrastructure, create healthy and safe streets, and enhance regional and local transit. These include integrating fare payment and trip planning for all Bay Area transit agencies, lowering speed limits and redesigning local streets with community input to promote walking and bicycling, including 7,000 miles of new bike lanes and paths, and advancing transit projects with high ridership, such as a new Trans-Bay rail crossing. We're committed to advancing bold housing strategies that can spur Bay Area housing production, including affordable housing in walkable communities. We can do this by reducing barriers to build housing near transit, transforming aging shopping malls and office parks into neighborhoods, and requiring more affordable housing units be built. To ensure the resilience of our region's economy, we're exploring how we can increase wages and shift the location of jobs by retaining industrial lands that can help us maintain a healthy manufacturing sector, discouraging development of new office parks in areas not well served by transit by imposing a fee on new developments, and expanding a 50% child care subsidy to all low-income households with children under 5, allowing more parents to remain in or enter the workforce. And to protect the natural environment that makes the Bay Area so unique, we are considering how we can reduce risks from hazards and minimize our impact on the environment by adapting to sea level rise in our coastal and bayside communities, expanding our climate program, which implements innovative projects to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, and ensuring development is focused within existing city boundaries. Thank you for joining us. Please engage with us on the plan by visiting planbayarea.org or on Facebook and Twitter at MTC-BATA. Your input will help us create the final blueprint, which will feed into Plan Bay Area 2050. Thank you.
So hopefully that video gave you a sense of some of the key aspects of Plan Bay Area 2050. This slide shows you a quick summary of those highlighted strategies that are in play. Again, 25 in total, clustered under 9 key themes. The draft blueprint helps us maintain and optimize our existing infrastructure while redesigning our streets and investing in transit. It helps us spur housing production at all income levels and encourage more affordable housing in our communities. It works to improve economic mobility through childcare subsidies and job programs, as well as strategies to shift the location of jobs. And last but not least, the draft blueprint invests in those sea level rise protections, home retrofits, and protections for natural and agricultural lands. Altogether, this 25 strategies in the draft blueprint work as a package to make our communities more resilient and equitable in the years ahead. If you'd like to learn more about the strategies, check out our website for a convenient booklet describing each of them. This is not the first time we've done public engagement for Plan Bay Area 2050. In fact, in fall 2019, when we did a prior round of outreach, we got nearly 13,000 comments from pop-up workshops across all 9 counties, as well as through an online tool known as the Mayor of Bayville. We were pleased to see the amount of support for taking bold action to make the Bay Area better for future generations, with 90% of the comments received at the time supportive of the strategies you just heard about. We know that your feedback today will help us further improve the final blueprint slated for release this fall. It's also a great opportunity to focus the strategies more directly to address the needs of the post-COVID era. So let's talk a little more about what the draft blueprint means for the Bay Area. Combined, the 25 strategies make significant progress on some key regional issue areas. Of course, they don't solve all of our region's problems, and that's why we're gathering with you today to give us feedback on how to move the needle further. Starting with some of the housing outcomes, a notable highlight is that the draft blueprint's housing and transportation strategies would enable us to start reversing the decade-long trend of rising unaffordability in the Bay Area. As of 2015, the average Bay Area household spent 57% of their household budget on housing and transportation. But by enabling more housing growth near transit and in communities with well-resourced schools, we're projecting a forecasted reduction by 9 percentage points to 48% of a household's budget by 2050. This reduction is even greater for our low-income households, driven by a significant number of permanently affordable new homes we call deed-restricted affordable housing, as well as income-based discounts for tolls and transit fares. Funding in the draft blueprint enables the construction of over 400,000 permanently affordable homes, which leads to those even greater benefits for those who are least able to afford the Bay Area's high housing costs. Furthermore, a lot of the growth in the draft blueprint is focused in walkable communities with frequent nearby transit service, which enables more people to walk, bike, and take transit. By 2050, we anticipate that 43% of Bay Area households would be able to walk to a high-frequency public transit line with service frequencies of 15 minutes or better. Next. On the environmental front, there's even more good news. The investments in bicycle infrastructure and speed limit reductions that were discussed in the video earlier could save more than 1,500 lives over the next 30 years. And while that's not enough to get to zero fatalities by 2050, it's a meaningful step to address the high casualties on our region's road system. When it comes to hazards, things like earthquakes and sea level rise, retrofits to homes, as well as seawalls, levees, and natural infrastructure included in the draft blueprint ensure that 100% of all homes at high risk of damage in an earthquake, as well as 98% of homes threatened by sea level rise over the next 30 years are protected. And lastly, despite the significant tax increases that would be required to fund many of these strategies, increases that I might note would primarily affect businesses and higher income individuals, we're seeing that Bay Area businesses remain positioned for further growth in the decades ahead, even as we face a major recession today. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Germerod, who will walk through the outcomes of the analysis.
Thanks, Dave. All right, let's dig into some of the details related to the draft blueprint. See if I can start my video. Okay. There it goes. The Bay Area is expected to grow by 2.7 million people and 1.4 million new jobs over the planning time horizon. To ensure that this additional growth does not lead to continued increases in housing costs, it is essential that we produce enough affordable housing to meet this demand, as well as to address overcrowding and displacement that we see today. For some households, this means market rate construction, and for others, we need to have public subsidies to ensure that rent or mortgage is within reach. To do this, the draft blueprint includes 1.5 million new housing units, including over 400,000 permanently protected for the lowest income households. Importantly, the draft blueprint includes 1 new home for every 1 new job. On housing and jobs, this slide shows where that growth might occur with the strategies included in the draft blueprint. You can see on the left side that 41% of all new housing growth is forecasted for Santa Clara County, the heart of Silicon Valley. Also, 27% of the growth is being forecasted for the East Bay and 20% for San Francisco and the Peninsula. The North Bay continues to have relatively limited growth. Approximately 14% of all new housing units would be located in the North Bay. On the right side, you can see a breakdown of job growth in green circles. The trend here also rather similar, with a significant proportion, 44% of all new jobs located in Silicon Valley, with continued clustering in the region's largest job center. Growth is more limited in other parts of the region, but there's also significant growth in Alameda County, San Francisco County, and San Mateo County. Important, 70% of the housing growth is located in areas within a half-mile of frequent transit, and 50% of all new jobs are located in those areas as well. As noted earlier, this is why much of the region's growth is focused in walkable places near public transportation. Looking specifically here at Napa County, the draft blueprint also includes a breakdown of where growth might occur on a more localized level, as you can see here. For the purposes of this map, we've clustered growth within the county into northern and southern Napa County. Southern Napa County, which includes the cities of Napa and American Canyon, grows more than the communities in northern Napa County, which includes Calistoga, St. Helena, and Yountville. The draft blueprint focuses housing growth in areas prioritized by local governments in Napa County, such as Highway 29 corridor and American Canyon. The job growth follows a similar pattern of housing, with new employment opportunities clustering along key corridors, particularly in southern Napa. Switching over to what transportation looks like in the future, ultimately this growth pattern would provide Bay Area residents more choices in terms of transportation. We anticipate 17%, or roughly 1 in 5 Bay Area workers, would change their commuting patterns as a result. The pie chart shows the share of commute trips by different modes today and in 2050. In addition to significant growth in telecommuting, we also see more Bay Area residents choosing to walk, bicycle, or take public transit, thanks to investments in bicycle infrastructure, transit infrastructure, and additional density near transit stations. We know that climate change is creating huge challenges for our region, as it is bounded by water on nearly all sides. Plan Bay Area 2050 is the region's first long-range plan that integrates sea level rise protections to make sure that communities are not flooded as the bay rises. On the left, you can see a breakdown of the number of units at risk from sea level rise and also the share of those units that are protected. Most notably, San Francisco, Marin, and Santa Clara counties all have large numbers of housing units at risk due to sea level rise. But in those counties, as well as most other counties in the Bay Area, a system of levees, horizontal levees, marsh restoration, and other sorts of environmental protections ensure nearly all of the homes in those communities are protected from flooding. In total, the protections in the draft blueprint protect 89,000 homes from flooding, with just 2,000 homes still at risk. The adaptation strategy also protects 166,000 job sites, with just 10,000 jobs unprotected. Finally, the strategy includes 100,000 acres of marsh restoration and adaptation, as well as protections or elevations of all major highway and rail corridors through 2050. So, what does this mean for your county in terms of infrastructure improvements? On the transportation front, investments are made in the Vine Trail, the Soskull Junction, and additional funds are committed to providing frequency boosts to the Napa Vine local and regional bus routes. Napa receives a large investment in elevating, Napa receives a lot of benefit in elevating the entire State Route 37 corridor, maintaining the largest east-west corridor in the North Bay. This project is also woven in concert with marsh restoration and adaptation. While we make a lot of progress in the draft blueprint advancing equity, improving affordability, and protecting the Bay Area's environment, we're still falling short on one central environmental goal: addressing climate change. Plan Bay Area 2050 is required by state law to include strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 19% per person by the year 2035. From tolling the region's freeways to enabling more growth near BART stations and more, the draft blueprint strategies we've showcased today move the needle quite a bit. We estimate that they could yield up to a 12 percentage point reduction as a result of the strategies combined. But again, the state target is 19%. This means that the remaining gap of roughly 7 percentage points will need new or expanded strategies in the final blueprint to close that gap. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ursula, who will help us identify any clarifying questions we may have received so far.
Okay, so yes, we have some questions in the Q&A box, and please continue to type those in. I'd like to introduce our additional staff members, Adam Crenshaw of the Funding, Policy, and Programs section at MTC ABAG, and Raleigh McCoy from our Regional Planning section, who will also answer your questions. So again, if you haven't already, please type your questions into the Q&A box, and the planners will answer the questions. As a reminder for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question at this part of the meeting. Please jot your questions down now, and after the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, and we will enter them into the official record. And you can always send us an email at info@planbayarea.org. Okay, so I will start with the questions. First question. With the current trend under the COVID environment being away from transit, will there be any adjustment toward reconsidering housing focused near transit, or will there be additional consideration for housing with connections or investments in active transportation infrastructure?
So that's a great question, Diana. We've been thinking a lot about the impacts from COVID-19 on the region's future, and certainly there will be challenges in the next 5 years with regards to attracting folks to public transportation and recovering our region's ridership. But there's still a lot of important reasons to continue to grow near transit, most importantly because much of our transit serves walkable downtown areas where not only transit is an option, but also walking, bicycling, and also leads to shorter auto trips. So we continue to see the need for focusing growth in our existing communities as opposed to building at the region's periphery. I did want to ask my colleague Raleigh McCoy to chime in a bit on some of the additional transportation strategies that we're exploring for the final blueprint.
Thanks, Dave. So in the final blueprint, we're exploring a number of transit improvements that would be implemented over the 30-year time horizon, from increased frequencies on local bus service to a network of express lanes that are served by express buses, giving one-seat rides from places like Vallejo to San Francisco or downtown Oakland to Redwood City. We're also looking at increasing frequencies on our commuter rail systems, including Caltrain and BART, as well as a second Transbay rail crossing connecting the East Bay with San Francisco, helping to alleviate crowding on one of the most crowded transit corridors. And in Napa, we're also looking at frequency increases on Napa Vine to help serve both local and regional trips.
Okay, thank you so much. We have one more question. As a Napa resident, I see a big discrepancy in job growth versus housing growth. Napa already has one of the biggest discrepancies between job and housing growth, almost 17-1 since the year 2001. You are projecting this trend to continue. This creates a terrible shortage of affordable housing for workers and ever longer commutes from out of county. What can be done to flatten that curve?
This is also a great question from Eric, and that's actually what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. The draft blueprint strategies make progress on a number of issues, but they don't solve our jobs housing imbalance in the region. And so we're actually going to be asking you about some different strategy ideas, not only to produce more housing, but also how we could encourage a better balance of jobs and housing across the region. So we'll actually be coming back to that in just a few minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, we have one more question. As a member of Napa Climate Now, I know there are a lot more things we can do, not only to meet the state mandated levels for greenhouse gas emission reduction, but to exceed the state mandates. We have seen leadership from many of the Bay Area cities on projects ranging from all reach codes, all reach codes and fading out of new natural gas infrastructure to increased household composting to reduce methane generation. We can also do much more to reduce black carbon, a significant short-lived climate pollutant, for example, from agricultural burning. Please share more about your additional potential climate strategies.
So I'll go ahead and jump in. We do have a strategy called retrofit and modernize existing buildings. So there's been a lot of work to make sure that the new buildings that get built over the next 30 years are clean and water efficient. And so a lot of the gains that we're going to see in our building sector are going to come from going into the ones that are already here. And so we have a strategy there that's looking at water and energy efficiency upgrades. And so we're working with partners of the Air District to understand how we can continue to advance those types of strategies.
Wonderful. We have a question for Raleigh. Looks like the transit element of the plan for Napa County focuses only on expanded bus service. The buses have to share the congested State Route 29 corridor. Rail service on existing tracks using EMU technology would provide a viable alternative getting to Vallejo ferry service and to tie into the potential rail service in the Highway 37 corridor. So that's more of a comment than a question, Raleigh or Dave.
I would just also highlight, in terms of improved bus service on that congested SR 29 corridor, one of the improvements that's proposed for that corridor is something called transit signal priority, where transponders on buses communicate with stoplights, for example, helping to give the bus priority and expedite bus service on that corridor. But these are also great other suggestions for improvements for east-west service along the SR 37 corridor, and thank you for that comment, Hans.
Okay, I think that's it for now. It looks like, all right. So thank you so much for those questions. Thanks to Adam, Raleigh, and Michael and Dave. They will all be back later to answer more of your questions. And we're gonna keep the interactive part of this meeting going. Now we're gonna use your polling software that we discussed at the beginning and try it out with our test question. And I'm gonna turn it back over to Dave and Michael, and who will remind us how to use the poll software and walk us through the questions.
Thanks, Ursula. Okay, we're ready to hear your feedback as we go through 5 big challenges that we're trying to address with continued refinements of the blueprint strategies. To participate, go to pollev.com/MTCABAG302 on your phone or web browser, and we will go through the questions one by one. Or on your cell phone, send a text message to 22333. And in the body of the text, you're going to want to type MTCABAG302 and then send. Since the question will not show up on your phone, we will read the question and answer choices for you for each question. All right. So let's start with challenge number 1, affordable housing. Here's what we integrated in the draft blueprint in order to create more affordable housing in the Bay Area. We included strategies to allow a greater mix of housing types and densities in key growth areas near transit and near well-resourced schools. We included a strategy to fund affordable housing protection, preservation, and production. And we included a strategy to require developers to build more affordable units. And yet, despite all of these strategies and more, there are still hundreds of thousands of low-income households in 2050 who lack homes with permanently affordable protections. So our challenge for you is, how do we create more of that affordable housing, permanently affordable housing, especially in areas with high-quality schools, amenities, and transportation options? So it's your time to vote. What strategies should we consider for expansion or addition to the final blueprint to make it more affordable? Press A now to invest in constructing more affordable housing units. Press B now to accelerate redevelopment of malls and office parks with significant shares of affordable housing. Press C to expand capacity for new housing in communities with well-resourced schools and good access to jobs. Press D to advance innovative approaches to reducing housing construction and financing costs. Or press E for none of the above. So we're going to give you a minute to input your feedback. I think I'd like to turn to Michael for some initial observations based on our results coming in.
Yeah, so it looks like investing just more in the affordable housing units. So the strategy as it exists right now is trying to raise roughly $1.5 billion annually to construct more affordable housing units. And so If we raise more money, there's obviously the ability to construct more units, especially over a 30-year period. And it looks like while that was the #1 strategy 30 seconds ago, it's shifting on us.
Well, I think, to add to what you just mentioned, Michael, it looks like we're seeing some support for the mall and office park redevelopment. I think that it might be especially timely right now, just with the impacts COVID-19 is and may continue to have on our retail sector and our shopping mall across the Bay Area. Also want to note some interest in innovative approaches to reduce housing construction costs. Certainly the cost of producing housing in the Bay Area is just very high compared to the rest of the United States. And so even incremental improvements there seem to be something that, that would be of interest to our participants today.
And also something that's in the news, we did see a project over at the city of Berkeley where they're using modular housing as a form that's going to cost roughly 30 to 40% less than a traditional method. So great.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I think we'll move on to the next question here. So going beyond some of our initial ideas to make the Bay Area more affordable, now you can type in your feedback on other strategies, ideas, or issues that we should consider as we try to increase affordable housing in the Bay Area. So we'll take a moment here and let you type in your response.
So as folks get going here, I thought I'd just share a few thoughts that we heard prior to these county workshops. We had some focus groups with disadvantaged communities across the region to really have some deep conversations with some folks. And members of the community shared that the affordable housing challenge isn't just about having the units. There's a lot of work to ensure that the folks understand how to access the affordable housing that is built. Residents who don't speak English or have a student status may not be able to apply for the housing that gets built. So that's something that we heard a few weeks ago when we were out talking to communities. And so let's see what we've got coming in right now.
I see one commenter has brought up disincentives for second home purchases. Certainly that's very applicable up in Napa County and across the North Bay. We also see a comment coming in here about more equitable pay and access to better paying jobs. That's certainly a key part of the equation. It's not just how much housing costs, but how much income are you bringing in to pay for housing in the region. And certainly kind of an area of concern for us going forward is, the continued income inequality, which makes it very difficult for our lower income residents to be able to afford a home purchase in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Looks like we're also hearing a comment similar to what we heard previously in focus groups about language and education barriers, either getting into kind of an affordable housing, a permanently affordable housing unit. There were also comments about, from those focus groups, about getting access to not just a rental unit that way, but also trying to build wealth through a home buying option.
I think some other good points coming in about kind of related services to housing, things like financial workshops and counseling and supportive wraparound services like childcare. That's certainly an area that's included in the economic element of our plan, is subsidies for childcare to ensure our lower income residents not only have a home, but also have an opportunity to continue working when they have children. They have that choice.
It also looks like the strategy that we just talked about on the previous option there about reducing the cost of construction. We're seeing that just in terms of permit fees and maybe tiny homes or modular home parks, co-housing, all things that folks are looking for us to explore.
Lots of great feedback. Thank you all for that. I think we're ready to move on to our second challenge of the night. So I'll turn it over to Michael.
Great. So here's what we've integrated into the draft blueprint for traffic congestion and transit crowding. We have in the draft blueprint strategies that advance high ridership transit projects, other strategies that reform the regional transit fare policy, And finally, a strategy that implements per mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives. So that wouldn't be tolling on every freeway, but rather ones that have a good transit alternative like those that parallel BART or Caltrain. However, despite these improvements, traffic congestion and transit overcrowding continued to worsen in many freeway corridors and on many of the transit systems. So the challenge that we're left with is how can new or expanded strategies alleviate traffic congestion on suburban highways and reduce overcrowding on bus and rail lines? So just like you did on the previous exercise, we're going to ask you to respond on which strategies you think we need to expand or include. So what should be included in our strategies to alleviate traffic congestion and reduce overcrowding on transit in the Bay Area? For those of you using the web, you can just go ahead and select. For those on the phone, I'll read them out. If you want to implement all lane tolling on high traffic freeways with transit alternatives, press A. Invest more in world-class bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to make it easier to reach local destinations without a car, press B. Build more express lanes with robust express bus service, press C. To redesign public transit systems to provide more seamless transfers and focus service on high frequency routes, press D. To extend regional rail services to new communities and increase the frequency of service, press E. To widen highways and expand interchanges to yield short-term congestion relief, press F. And if none of those ideas interest you, you can press G. So Dave, it looks like we've got a few that have minor support and then a few that have quite a bit of support.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, Michael. Seeing very strong support for an expensive but popular strategy to extend regional rail services to new communities, and certainly something that we're considering as part of the final blueprint. Also noting, pretty broad support as well for redesign of transit systems, investments in bicycle infrastructure, and building more express lanes. Those are carpool lanes that single occupant drivers can pay to use, as well as express bus service in those lanes.
Yeah. It looks like there's not a ton of support for the all lane tolling on highways, but there's also not much support for widening or expanding those interchanges that would yield those short-term congestion relief. So it looks like it's slowing down here, so I think we're ready for the next question. So just like the other one, we kind of were constraining you with the first question, and now we're opening it up. Is there anything else we should take into consideration to address the challenge of congestion and transit crowding? And we'll give you guys a few seconds to get some thoughts down on there.
So while we wait for some feedback to come in, I wanted to highlight some of the things we've heard from communities across the Bay Area on this topic to date. Certainly a lot of interest from folks in our disadvantaged communities or communities of concern across the region for investments in really the amenities associated with our public transit system, well-lit stations, safe stations, making improvements to those sorts of amenities. Also, low-cost improvements, things like, painting crosswalks, so it's easier for folks to walk and feel safe as they're getting around their communities. I think that was something that really struck us, is how some of these low-cost strategies, things that may not be big, bold investments, but really make a difference on the neighborhood level, proved very popular. It looks like we got some feedback coming in here now. Definitely seeing some support here for improved transit connections. Also some commentary on challenges with regards to using transit efficiently to get to and from Bay Area destinations from Napa. What else are you seeing here, Michael?
Yeah, not just, commuter rail all the way up to St. Helena and beyond. So maybe folks are thinking that it can go up to Lake County too, if it gets built up that way. And also the most recent comment, more communication on benefits of using non-single occupancy cars to an alternative, incentives for getting out of the car. Great.
Also seeing a comment here about connecting traffic signals on commute corridors. That actually is a very important kind of technology-based strategy that we are exploring for the final blueprint for Plan Bay Area 2050. So that's a great comment. I'm going to give folks maybe just one more minute to provide us some more feedback. Also interested, it looks like just came in support for bus rapid transit across the Bay Area. As we noted earlier, the final blueprint, we are considering some significant investments in express bus services, including investments, as was noted, on that Highway 29 corridor to provide frequent and rapid service between Napa and Vallejo and El Cerrito.
Yeah, and it looks like there's continued support, Dave, for some of those operational improvements, getting buses through intersections and such, as we've been discussing already.
I think this really underscores, there's interest, we're seeing interest here in both buses and trains. The costs of those rail investments are significantly higher than the cost for bus investments. So we would be able to deliver a lot more improvements for the same amount of money with those bus modes as opposed to rail investments, which often costs many billions of dollars.
Yeah, we have our first comment bringing up the concept of slow streets in Napa. It's something that's being discussed all over the region right now in terms of, is this a strategy that could maybe get accelerated with all the changes that we've seen with COVID-19 and the response that communities are taking there. I think we'll probably just keep this open for a few more seconds and then probably move to the next one.
So thanks everybody for your great feedback on this major transportation challenge related to congestion and transit crowding. I think we'll move on to the next topic. All right, so we're on to challenge number 3 of 5, displacement. So of course, this is a significant issue for the San Francisco Bay Area today, and we brought to bear some key strategies to address this challenge in the draft blueprint. The draft blueprint included strategies to further strengthen renter protections beyond state legislation, reduce barriers to housing near transit and in areas of high opportunity, those places with well-resourced schools, and expansions of childcare support for low-income families to ensure that families are able to continue to remain in the workforce even as they have children. And yet, despite some of these strategies to address the region's displacement crisis, the risk of displacement in most Bay Area communities continues to grow over time. And so here's the challenge for today. How can we further ensure that low-income residents and communities of color are not ultimately displaced to areas with limited access to opportunity? So let's hear from you. What strategies should we expand or add to the final blueprint to address displacement in the Bay Area? Select A if you'd like to expand investment in preservation of permanently affordable housing in communities facing displacement. Press B if you'd like to ensure ample affordable housing is built in communities most at risk of displacement. Select option C to implement workforce training programs to grow the middle class and make it easier for folks to stay in place. And choose option D if you'd like to dedicate and protect ample investments in schools, parks, and transit, and improve quality of life in communities where displaced residents are moving. Or select option E, none of the above. So Michael, what are we seeing here in terms of the initial votes?
It looks like the preservation of affordable housing is the most popular thus far. So that would be looking at either housing that's currently deemed affordable and making sure that it stays that way as different kind of financing structures sunset, making sure that we have the funds there to make sure it stays that way, as well as expanding affordable housing so folks aren't displaced because of a lack of income.
And just adding on to that, looks like both of those top strategies related to affordable housing are of interest to our participants today. And that's certainly something that we've included investments for housing in the draft blueprint. It includes just about $170 billion for affordable housing, but there's still a remaining need of nearly $400 billion remaining.
And I think the only other comment that I'd make is just thus far, there seemed to be at least one strategy that folks are interested in. We don't see too much of none of the above thus far, which is great to hear that at least one, if not more, of these strategies are of interest to folks participating today.
So let's move on to hearing your thoughts on what we could do to address displacement in the Bay Area. So type in your ideas now, and we'll give you a few minutes to get those in.
So again, I'll just provide a little bit of what we've heard in talking to folks thus far. When we brought up the issue of displacement, we heard comments about making sure folks with poor credit history have a means to rent in their community, and that isn't what makes them unable to secure housing. And also making sure that there's access to legal support to make sure that renters are aware of their rights and that they have a means to protect themselves in case there's an proceeding that is thrust their way. Looks like we'll give folks a few minutes to get those comments come in.
So Michael, I'm seeing our first comment here, an interest in public sector-led property purchases that can be permanently maintained as affordable. And that's definitely a good suggestion. Also, another commenter suggests a specific amount of low-income housing in city and county zoning ordinances. So that is something that actually has been included in the draft blueprint, minimum standards by different cities and counties across the region for permanently affordable housing.
Yeah, and we've got a comment similar to what we saw on the housing and affordability set of comments here, looking at the second home purchases and trying to ensure that there's more of a supply for those trying to access a first home, and providing financing and to end redlining to enable people to buy their own homes in color. That's another comment that we've heard already thus far in terms of making sure that it isn't just about access to affordable rental properties, but also looking at home ownership as a way to get at the wealth gap that exists in our region and across the nation.
Another great comment that I see has come in here is about granny units, or what we might also call accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Definitely that's a key piece of the puzzle in terms of creating units that are more affordable to all of our residents. So thank you for that comment, and that's something we'll be thinking more about as we go into the final blueprint. Also, another great comment that I see coming in here is about school funding, financing schools equally so poor communities have access to good schools. That is a key challenge in our region and our state and our country, is just the disparities of funding for schools across the various places in the region, and that there's just a wide variety of different school quality as a result. All right, so I think we are about ready to move on. Please input any final comments here. We'll give you a couple more seconds.
All right, so we're going to move on to greenhouse gas emissions. This is our fourth of 5 challenges that we'll be getting your feedback on today. So to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we had a number of strategies integrated into the draft blueprint. A set of strategies implementing per mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives. That was really done to reduce the number of miles that are traveled in vehicles, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Building a complete street network and implementing reduced speed limits. So really expanding the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure across the entire region, and pairing that with reduced speed limits on both local as well as highways, which not only reduces emissions, but also reduces fatalities, something that Dave touched on in his highlights earlier. And then finally, allowing a greater mix of housing types and densities near frequent transit is the final package of strategies implemented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So as we mentioned earlier, despite these investments and this set of policies, the draft blueprint only gets us roughly halfway to our emissions reduction goal. So the challenge that we're presenting with you is how can we further reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions to meet critical climate goals? So I'm going to go ahead and read off the possible answers for those who are using the phone to text this in. If you think expand electric vehicle and charging infrastructure subsidies, especially for lower income households, is a good idea, press A. Postponing highway widening projects until the greater share of vehicles are electric is B. Charge parking fees to disincentivize driving, putting fees toward bicycle giveaways and free shuttles is C. And require employers to implement mandatory work from home policies 2 or 3 days per week. That is D. And if none of those strategies are of interest,
Well, Michael, I think we're seeing two of these really rising to the top here today. Certainly a lot of interest in electric vehicle and charging infrastructure subsidies. Those can really help make sure our fleet of vehicles emits less, but also pretty strong support for charging parking fees to disincentivize driving and using those revenues to provide those sorts of first and last mile connections that are so important in our downtowns across the Bay Area and in Napa County as well. So those two strategies really seem to be rising to the top.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe there's a way we can combine parking fees with charging stations and integrate it all together. Looks like we've got most of the votes now, and we can move to the more free response question here. So in addition to those ideas, is there anything else we should take into consideration to address climate emissions in the Bay Area?
So just to highlight some of the things we've been hearing to date with regards to emissions, especially in those communities that are most affected by them, certainly a lot of interest in cleaning our fleet, so emissions are reduced in communities that are highly impacted. But there's also concern about some of our strategies with regards to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, which might help address our climate goals, but those communities are very concerned about gentrification and displacement that might come along with those investments. So let's see what all of you are providing as feedback today. One commenter says that we should implement low emission zones in downtown areas. That is something that we are considering in San Francisco, which has congestion pricing that would work to discourage some of those emissions in the downtown. But certainly, maybe that's a strategy we can consider more broadly across the Bay Area. Also seeing some comments about economic diversification of Napa County, so there could be a less of a reliance on winemaking. Obviously, that is an industry that has a certain amount of carbon emissions associated with it. What else are you seeing here, Michael, that's of interest?
Yeah, it looks like there's support for sharing, both in terms of incentives for ride sharing and having electric scooter or bicycle sharing services. So making the most of the modes that are built. And then also a lot of talk about electrification, whether it's transit or buildings, as well as obviously electric vehicles, which is a big opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Also seeing some interest here, not only in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, which is a really central part of the blueprint with these 7,000 miles of trails. And as you note there, the commenter mentions green bikeways, protected bike lanes, so you're safe riding your bicycle, but also investments in internet infrastructure, so more folks can work in Napa County and telecommute to wherever their job might be. That seems especially salient right now in the COVID-19 era. And some comments about kind of ways to improve our climate outcomes beyond transportation, things like green landscapes, sections of our woodlands. Obviously, there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle when it comes to the climate. So I think we're going to move on to the next topic. All right, that brings us to our final challenge of the night, challenge number 5. jobs housing imbalance. So of course, the region has had long-standing jobs housing balance issues for decades. We tried to tackle some of these challenges in the draft blueprint by investing in our housing, and we're successful at bringing more housing to job-rich places. But we struggled in many locations at bringing jobs to housing-rich places and getting that balance on the other side of the equation. The strategies we tried to include to advance this included impact fees on new office developments, retention of industrial lands, and incubator programs in economically challenged areas. And yet, despite this, jobs continue to cluster in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, far away from many of our existing residents. So here's the challenge for tonight. How could more ambitious economic strategies be employed to shift jobs closer to existing housing-rich communities? All right, it's time to vote. Press A if you think increasing fees that discourage development of new office parks in job-rich, auto-oriented communities is the right way to do this. Press B if you would like to expand incubator programs to create new small businesses in housing-rich communities. Press C if you'd like to prohibit more construction of office buildings in communities that have many more jobs than homes. And press D if you'd like to provide tax subsidies for employers who want to relocate middle-wage jobs closer to affordable housing. If none of these strategies work for you, press E. Michael, what are we seeing in the initial results here?
Well, it looks like there's support for the incubator program for new small businesses in housing-rich communities, which is exciting. That's a strategy that has been included in the draft blueprint. And so it sounds like there's support for that. And maybe we might want to think about expanding that strategy a little bit.
Certainly, and in fact, relevant to Napa, so in your neighboring county of Solano County would be one of the key places for some of those incubator programs. Places like Vallejo on Mare Island is one of the places we've been exploring as an opportunity site for those sorts of incubator programs. I'm also struck by the strong support for tax subsidies for employers to relocate their jobs. So that's a strategy that's often employed in other parts of the United States to attract new economic development, something that's a little bit less common here in the Bay Area. And so we're seeing pretty strong support from that from our participants this evening.
And it looks like we have one or two folks who've used none of the above, so I'm excited to hear what they have in store for us on the next slide.
Definitely. So let's go to the next slide and hear from you about this economic challenge for the region. What should we do to address this jobs housing imbalance in the Bay Area? But type in your questions now. Type in your responses now, I should say.
And I'll just provide kind of one last insight that we've received from the conversations thus far. And it wasn't as much a specific recommendation as just a continued focus on asking the question of, we talk about the number of jobs, but it's really about, what those jobs are, and are a number of them in the middle wage sector? Are there growth outside of the technology sector? How can we ensure a greater kind of portfolio of jobs in the future? And so we've been asked and challenged to think through ways that we can try and achieve a greater share of kind of middle wage jobs.
Michael, I'm seeing some really great comments coming in here. I think the first one about encouraging more folks to work from home, that really can be one way to address the challenges of jobs housing imbalances. If workers don't have to go to the office as frequently, that long commute distance becomes a little bit less of an issue. And it also reduces the climate impact associated with those long commutes. Also, really like the comment about requiring housing for every new job. I'd note that the draft blueprint includes roughly one new home for every one new job. So I think it's really about how do we make that real, beyond the planning world. How would we bring that sort of land use pattern to bear in the real world? And that may require actions to encourage employers to produce housing, as the commenter notes. What comments are you seeing rise to the top?
Yeah, we've got a comment here on bonuses or incentives for employing locally, and through the public procurement, tying those to local sources. So as governments are going out and bringing in folks to do contracts, making sure that folks who are there in the community have either a bonus or incentive there when that gets sorted out. Also, making sure that it isn't just the rents for homeowners, but it's also businesses, making sure that small businesses can afford the rents in Napa towns. Commenter says the downtowns are turning into tourist meccas with fewer and fewer basic services. So making sure that a full diversity of kind of what communities need, have access to retail and commercial and possibly industrial space in communities.
Seeing a few more comments popping up here. Ensuring land use codes enable small businesses to set up in garages, ADUs, residential areas. Definitely, providing more flexibility in terms of land use is going to be a key aspect of our long-range plan. We need to provide those opportunities for jobs and housing across the Bay Area. And I see one commenter has brought up form-based codes as a potential solution, as ensure that communities have a certain character to them, but there's more flexibility in terms of the type of development and how that actually looks on the ground. A lot of great comments here. I will give you a couple more seconds to type in any last thoughts, and we're going to go on to our final poll question.
So our final question for the evening is, which of the key challenges we highlighted is the most urgent to be addressed in the final blueprint? And we're asking for you to select your top two. So after you select the first one, go ahead and select the second. Again, these are the two challenges you feel are most urgent to be addressed in the final blueprint kind of shared with everyone today. So it looks like there's some early support for the housing unaffordability and climate emission challenges.
Michael, that really aligns with a lot of what we hear across the Bay Area, that housing affordability is really challenge number one for so many residents. Also want to note, looks like the second most highly rated challenge area is related to climate change and emissions in the region and trying to address that. Less interest looks like in addressing the displacement challenges, and more moderate interest in congestion and crowding challenges.
Yeah. So it looks like we're starting to settle in here, and I just want to thank everyone. I'm seeing that we still got basically the same number of participants we started with, and that isn't always the case with an hour-plus long meeting. So I want to thank folks for sticking with us as we've gotten this feedback here. And so now I'm just going to turn it back to Dave, who's going to tell us about a few of our important regional initiatives that are also ongoing.
Thanks, Michael. So before we get to our final question and answer session for the evening, we wanted to highlight a few related regional initiatives that aren't necessarily about the 30 years ahead, but things a little bit more near term, the next 5 to 10 years, from transportation to housing to air quality and sea level rise. So we're spotlighting 4 related initiatives to Plan Bay Area 2050 that you might be interested in. So let's start with transportation. One of those near-term efforts on the transportation front is known as the Transportation Improvement Program. That reflects local, regional, state, and federal funding priorities and decisions. It's a key document that is the 4-year clearinghouse of Bay Area transportation projects and their funding. It's focused over the next 4 years, and so really the early years of Plan Bay Area 2050. As this graphic shows, MTC is always interested in new transportation project ideas. We in fact solicited them for Plan Bay Area 2050 in 2018 and 2019, and they often get incorporated in the long-range plan, Plan Bay Area 2050, and then the Transportation Improvement Program hones in on the next 4 years of project priorities. So ultimately, that will ultimately proceed towards construction and implementation. You'll see a breakdown of the 2019 Transportation Improvement Program expenditures and fund sources at the bottom, and we encourage you to check out the project's website to learn more. Let's turn to housing. What's happening in the near term on housing? A key regional initiative at the moment is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process, referred to by its acronym RHNA. Since 1969, the Association of Bay Area Governments, under state law, has been required to identify how much housing growth local jurisdictions need to plan for over an 8-year time period. At the completion of the RHNA process, each local government updates their housing elements and zoning to show how it would accommodate its share of regional housing needs. For this upcoming cycle, the Bay Area will need to plan for just over 441,000 new homes over an 8-year period, a key piece of the puzzle when we're trying to get to 1.5 million new homes by 2050. The RHNA process is already well underway, but here are some key milestones in case you want to get engaged. This fall, in sync with the final blueprint for Plan Bay Area 2050, the allocation for the RHNA methodology will be considered by the ABAG board for approval. It'll need to be consistent with the blueprint you heard about today. Further steps will be taken in 2021, leading to a final allocation and updates to local housing elements by January 2023 in many Bay Area cities and towns. Go to abag.ca.gov to learn more. Finally, we'll turn to two initiatives from our other regional partners, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. These agencies have programs related to air quality, climate change, and climate resilience. The Air District creates the Clean Air Plan, with the last iteration approved in 2017, identifying strategies to protect public health and protect the climate. This plan attempts to make progress towards air quality standards and reducing health risk disparities. But in the years ahead, the Air District will be focusing on important grant programs that help local jurisdictions, Bay Area businesses, and the public improve air quality, from clean vehicle rebates, things like rebates for new eligible zero-emission vehicles, as well as Clean Cars for All, a program in which low-income families can scrap an old vehicle and get a grant to reduce the cost of a new electric vehicle, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or Clipper card. BCDC also has a program called Bay Adapt, a 6-month effort to develop and adopt a regional strategy to protect from rising sea levels. As we integrated sea level rise into Plan Bay Area 2050, which you heard about today, we've been working closely with the Bay Adapt team to understand both the impacts of sea level rise as well as the types of strategies needed to protect the shoreline in all 9 counties of the Bay Area. Check out the website on this slide to learn more. And now I'll turn it back over to Ursula, who will facilitate our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Dave and Michael. Great job. For the remainder of our time this evening, we will read some of the questions from the Q&A box, and we're going to ask staff to respond. And if I could get Michael, Raleigh, and Adam to turn on their cameras. So please continue to write your questions. We have a couple questions here and comments, and we will answer them. And as a reminder for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question as we mentioned before. The comment line number, I'll say it again, 415-778-2292. Please leave us a message with your comments, and again, they will enter into the official record, which we share with our commissioners and ABAG board members. And you can always send us an email at info@planbayarea.org. So everyone, the first question, Napa has a unique issue in the Bay Area. We have only 140,000 residents and over 3.5 million visitors annually. As a rural agricultural county, how do we deal with the jobs housing balance to accommodate the 25,000 hospitality employees who commute into Napa each day because local housing is unaffordable for them?
That's a great question, Terry. Napa is a very unique place with challenges, but these challenges are sometimes a microcosm of the challenges that the overall Bay Area faces. This is why it's so important that we invest in strategies to produce more affordable housing, not just in certain parts of the Bay Area, but across all Bay Area communities. And so that's why, as we continue to refine the final blueprint, we're going to need to be thinking about the amount of affordable housing funding for every single county in the region, and then work to advance strategies on the regional or county levels to generate monies to build more affordable housing. But it's also why we need to look at strategies to reduce construction costs, consider ways to encourage more construction of accessory dwelling units or those granny flats we were talking about earlier, and just overall enable more housing in all counties in the region. So that way those workers don't have to in-commute in the future.
Great, thank you. Next question, how is the projected growth in housing and population calculated? This represents substantially accelerated growth over the recent past.
Well, if you're interested in the technical approach, all the technical methodology for our future forecast is posted on the MTC and ABAG websites. But in short, you're correct that there's accelerated housing production compared to previous plans. Historically, the region has seen robust job growth, but hasn't kept up with the housing needs in the region. And so what Plan Bay Area 2050 tries to do is to try to enable us to catch up from decades of underproduction, especially at lower income levels. And it's going to require bold actions to implement in the years ahead. Concerted efforts on the local, regional, and state levels will be required if we all want to work together to reduce the cost of housing in the Bay Area. And it will mean more housing in our existing communities.
Great, thank you, Dave. This question is for Raleigh. It's probably way too late for something like this, but is there any chance that we could have a single multi-county transit system like they do in Boston and MBTA?
So thank you for this question, and I really love the visionary approach that you're taking to rethinking our regional transit system. While in the blueprint, we won't be going quite so far as to envision a system like Boston area's MBTA like you're describing, we are thinking about ways to rationalize our multi-operator transit system and help users have a more seamless experience. There are two strategies in particular I want to quickly highlight. One is we're exploring the impacts of a seamless app, like a mobile app that would help you plan for all your transit across multiple operators and pay for it from one account. And then the other thing that we're studying for the first time in the blueprint is an integrated approach to fare payment, where fares are integrated across operators and you just pay one price based on the distance that you're traveling instead of multiple separate fares across different operators. And also part of that, we're integrating income-based discounts for low-income residents in that system.
If you're interested more in how to make our transit system more rationalized, there's also a near-term effort that's occurring right now, and that's what's known as the Blue Ribbon Task Force, which is tackling our region's transit challenges in the context of COVID-19. And as we rebuild our system after this pandemic we're experiencing today, there's opportunities to make it more seamless, more connected, and just overall a better experience for customers. So I encourage you to check that out. There's more information on the MTC website.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see any more questions. Any last call, everyone? Well, the last call for this session. There's actually other sessions, and there's other ways, as I've mentioned many, many times, to comment. So I guess I'll move it along. Thank you for your input. And just so you know, we have captured all of your poll results and comments, and your input will feed into the blueprint and also be presented to our commission, as I mentioned, and ABAG executive board members in September. Next slide. So first, we want to thank you for spending time with us tonight and providing your input. I wanted to spend a few minutes to tell you what's next for Plan Bay Area 2050 and the draft blueprint. And I also wanted to remind you of the ways that you can provide additional comments, but you probably have it memorized by now because I've mentioned it many times. So the next step for the draft blueprint includes continuing public engagement through the public comment period, which ends on August 10th. The Commission and ABAG board will take action on the final blueprint this fall. Selection of the preferred environmental alternative takes place at the end of 2020, and the adoption of Plan Bay Area 2050 is slated for fall of 2021. To get additional information on the plan throughout the process and the draft blueprint, please go to planbayarea.org/blueprint for more information. There you can access background information and reports, such as the reports highlighted here. You may also access the blueprint video at planbayarea.org/blueprint. In addition, if you have more input to share, we want to hear from you. I'll say it just one last time. Please send an email by August 10th, that's our cutoff, to info@planbayarea.org. As we mentioned earlier, we have the phone line at 415-778-2292. And finally, we have the online form I mentioned earlier to provide written comments on our Plan Bay Area 2050 website. So go to the website I mentioned earlier, planbayarea.org/blueprint, and go to the public comments page and you'll see the form there. So thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. This was really great in our inaugural effort here. We really, really appreciate your thoughtful comments, all of your input, hanging with us till the end. We know this is a difficult time for many of you. We want you to stay safe, and we truly appreciate your participation and your comments. If you know of someone who'd like to participate but could not attend today, the video of this presentation will be posted and a link to the survey you took today will be available, so please spread the word. We will also be hosting many more virtual events for the other Bay Area counties. Last day to comment is Monday, August 10th. Thank you again so much and have a wonderful evening.